Sergeant Jason Carter stood at attention, the weight of the moment settling over him like a heavy cloak. His eyes scanned the grand hall filled with military officials, dignitaries, and representatives from various species across the galaxy. This was not just any ceremony. It was the culmination of a long and hard-fought war. Jason's small unit, one of the few human squads that had been part of the Galactic Alliance, had just pulled off a miraculous victory. They had destroyed the enemy warship, a ship that had been a massive threat to the entire Alliance. The battle had been brutal, and many of his comrades hadn't made it. Jason had earned this honor, but it felt so surreal. The lights above flickered as a figure stepped onto the stage. The commander of the Galactic Alliance, a tall alien with metallic skin and glowing eyes, spoke in a deep, booming voice. Today, we honor Sergeant Jason Carter for his bravery, leadership, and sacrifice. His actions have turned the tide of war in our favor, and for that, he deserves this. Jason stood still, trying to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the battlefield. The blast of the enemy's weapons, the chaos, and the moment when he had been forced to make the hardest choice of his life. He had led his team into the heart of the enemy's defense, not knowing if they would make it out alive. Many didn't, but he did. And now, standing here, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had just done his duty, nothing more. He was snapped out of his thoughts as the commander continued. Sergeant Carter, for your bravery, you are being awarded the Medal of Galactic Honor. The commander stepped forward, holding a gleaming gold medal in his hand. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The room erupted in applause as the commander placed the medal around his neck. Jason barely noticed. His fingers lightly touched the cold metal, but the weight of the moment didn't hit him until he heard a soft murmur coming from the back of the room. Turning, Jason's eyes widened as a new figure entered the hall. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen before. Tall, graceful, and exuding an air of quiet power, the woman walked into the room like she owned it. She was dressed in a flowing gown that shimmered in the light, its material unlike any fabric Jason had ever encountered. Her skin was a shade of pale violet, her features sharp and elegant, almost otherworldly. She carried herself with the kind of dignity Jason had only seen in leaders of ancient civilizations. She wasn't just a dignitary. She wasn't just another high-ranking official. The woman was royalty. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had heard of the Trinara Empire, the most powerful species in the galaxy, but he had never expected to meet one of their rulers, let alone have one in this very hall. The room fell into a hush as all eyes turned to her. She stopped at the podium, her gaze locked onto Jason. There was no smile, no acknowledgement of the audience around her, only a direct, piercing stare that made Jason feel like she could see right through him. The commander cleared his throat, bringing the room's attention back to the ceremony. And now, the final part of this honor. In addition to your medal, Sergeant Carter, you will receive a gift. He gestured to the Trinara princess. This is Princess Lyraela, daughter of the Trinara Emperor. As part of the peace treaty between the Galactic Alliance and the Trinara Empire, she is to accompany you back to Earth. Jason blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. The applause was muffled by the rush of blood to his head. What did they mean by gift? Why was the princess, Lyraela, being given to him? The room remained quiet, waiting for Jason to react, but he could not find the right words. He had expected honors, maybe a formal speech, but not this. Not an alien princess. The last time he had seen something like this had been in a holofilm, a science fiction drama with grand space battles and noble heroes, but nothing like this had ever been real. Princess Lyraela took a step forward, her expression unreadable. She was tall and regal, with eyes that seemed to reflect the stars themselves. There was a coldness to her gaze, but something deeper, something that spoke of wisdom and experience beyond her years. Jason stood frozen, unsure of how to respond to the overwhelming situation. The commander's voice broke the silence. Princess Lyraela is here to help foster the alliance between our people. As a member of the royal family, She represents the future of the Trinara Empire, and it is our hope that your leadership and bravery will continue to inspire our people. Your role, Sergeant Carter, will now extend beyond military service. You will escort Princess Lyraela and ensure her safety as she adjusts to life on Earth. Jason's mind raced. He had heard stories of the Trinara, of their unrivaled technological power and their centuries of history, but he had never imagined he would be so closely tied to their future. The weight of the situation began to sink in. The peaceful treaty between their people had been hard-earned, and now it rested in his hands. A single soldier from Earth was now tasked with protecting a princess from one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. As the commander spoke more of formalities, Jason could not tear his gaze from Princess Lyraela. She remained still, regal, and distant, as if this entire ceremony were beneath her. And perhaps, to her, it was. He had no idea how to address her, what to say, or even if she would be willing to speak to him at all. The applause slowly died down as the commander concluded. "You may go now. Sergeant Carter, Princess Lyraela, may your journey be one of peace and prosperity for all." Jason was still in a daze as the princess began walking toward him. There was no fanfare, no show of affection. She simply moved, her footsteps silent against the floor. He could feel every pair of eyes on him, but it felt as though the entire room had disappeared. It was just him and her now, standing together in the middle of this strange, foreign ceremony. "Sergeant Carter," the princess spoke, her voice smooth and cold, yet somehow regal. "I trust you will be able to keep up with my expectations." Her eyes met his, her gaze unwavering. Jason's stomach tightened, but he managed a simple nod. The truth was, he had no idea what she was expecting. Was she disappointed? Did she even want to be here? Or was this just another piece of the political game her people played? "I'll do my best," Jason replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Lyraela didn't smile, nor did she show any sign of warmth. I would expect nothing less. With that, she turned and began walking towards the exit. Jason followed, his heart pounding in his chest. This was no ordinary mission. This wasn't just about fighting alien enemies and surviving. This was about navigating the complex, high-stakes politics of the galaxy, with an alien princess now tied to his every decision. And somewhere deep inside, Jason knew that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. As they made their way out of the grand hall, the whispers of the crowd faded behind them. Jason felt a strange sense of unease settle in his stomach. This wasn't just a medal he had earned. It was a responsibility, and he had no idea what kind of storm he had just stepped into. Jason sat in the small shuttle as it glided through the vastness of space. He could hear the hum of the engines, the soft vibrations underfoot, but his mind was somewhere far away. It wasn't the ship's movement or the cold metal walls around him that troubled him. It was her, Princess Lyraela. She sat across from him, her posture straight, her gaze out the window, not even acknowledging his presence. Jason had no idea what to say. He was a soldier, not a diplomat. He was used to battles, missions, strategy, things with clear objectives. But this was something entirely different. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. The stars outside the window flickered like distant memories, and Jason tried to focus on them, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the ceremony, to the moment he was handed the medal and told he would be responsible for this alien princess. He had spent most of his life in the military fighting for his country, but this was not what he had signed up for. Lyraela shifted slightly in her seat, her violet skin glowing faintly under the shuttle's lights. She had not spoken since the ceremony, not even a word of thanks for the protection he had promised. Jason wasn't sure if she even wanted to be here. The way she carried herself, so cold, so distant, was enough to make anyone question it. She looked out of place in this small shuttle, as if she belonged to a world far removed from the simple, gritty life Jason knew. He had heard rumors about the Trinara, of course. They were the galaxy's most advanced species, with technology that made humans look like children playing with toys. Their empire spanned several systems, and they were known for their strategic genius and unshakable pride. Lyraella, as the daughter of the Emperor, was no different. She had been raised to lead, to command, to rule. She was trained in the arts of diplomacy, combat, and history. Everything about her screamed power. Jason shifted in his seat, unsure of what to do next. It wasn't like he had any experience with royalty. He had never been around anyone like her before, and the thought of having to protect her, to ensure her safety, felt like a heavy burden. "Princess," he started, his voice rough from the silence. "Is there anything I can do for you?" Lyraella glanced at him, her eyes cold and calculating, before turning her attention back to the stars. She didn't answer right away, as if she were considering whether or not he was worth responding to. Jason couldn't help but feel the sting of her indifference. It wasn't like he expected her to throw herself at him in gratitude, but a simple acknowledgement would have been nice. "I am fine," she said finally, her voice as smooth as silk. "I don't need your help." Jason couldn't hide his surprise. "But you're here because of the Alliance. You're not just a symbol. Your safety is my responsibility." Lyraella turned her head slowly, locking eyes with him. "Do not think that I need your protection," she said, her tone sharp. "I am not some helpless princess in need of a guard." Jason's stomach churned at her words, but he didn't show it. He had been trained to take command of difficult situations, to remain calm under pressure. But this was different. She was not a soldier. She was not someone he could understand easily. The more he tried to protect her, the more it felt like he was stepping into a trap he didn't know how to navigate. They continued in silence for what felt like hours, the shuttle's engines humming softly in the background. Jason couldn't help but notice the way Lyraella's eyes seemed to shimmer in the dim light. She was not like the women he had known back on Earth. She didn't smile, didn't laugh, didn't show any sign of warmth, but there was something else in her eyes, something that Jason couldn't quite place. It was like she was a puzzle, one he didn't know how to solve. Finally, the shuttle systems pinged, and a soft voice came over the intercom, announcing their arrival at the Earth docking station. Jason's heart raced. This was it, his first official responsibility as her protector. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but there was no turning back now. He had made a promise, and he would see it through, no matter how difficult it became. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, and Jason unbuckled his seatbelt, standing up. He glanced over at Lyraella, who was already preparing to exit. She moved with an elegance that was almost unnerving, her movements fluid and controlled. She didn't seem to notice or care about the world around her. For her, everything was a carefully constructed performance, a role she played with perfection. Jason took a deep breath and followed her as she exited the shuttle. The docking station was bustling with activity. Military personnel, civilians, and a few representatives from the Galactic Alliance. They all looked at the princess as she walked past, but none dared to approach her. She was a symbol of power, of strength. And Jason, standing by her side, was now a part of that image. As they walked through the station, Jason noticed the stairs. People were whispering, some pointing, others bowing in respect. But Lyraella didn't acknowledge any of it. She moved as though she were above it all, a figure of importance, far beyond the common folk. Jason couldn't help but feel small in her presence. He had faced down alien enemies, fought in battles that would make most men tremble. But this was different. Lyraella was a world unto herself, a world Jason had no idea how to enter. When they finally reached the exit, a transport was waiting for them. It was sleek and fast, much like everything else in Lyraella's world. She didn't wait for Jason to open the door. She simply slid into the vehicle, and Jason followed suit. The driver, a human, didn't even glance at them as he started the engine. He was clearly accustomed to this kind of thing. Liraella didn't speak for the entire ride, her eyes trained on the city passing by outside. Jason tried to find something to say, but he couldn't. Everything he thought of seemed trivial in comparison to the silence between them. He wondered if she was judging him, measuring him against some unknown standard, or maybe she didn't care at all. Finally, they reached their destination, a secure estate designed to keep the princess safe from any potential threats. The house was large, modern, and secluded, surrounded by tall walls and high-tech security systems. It was perfect for someone like her, someone who was used to luxury and safety. Jason stepped out first, and as he turned to help Liraella, she was already out of the car, walking toward the entrance with a grace that made everything else seem insignificant. She barely glanced at him as she entered the building, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Jason stood still, staring at the grand estate. He had been tasked with protecting this alien princess, but what did that really mean? How was he supposed to keep her safe when she didn't even want his help? He had spent years fighting on foreign battlefields, protecting his comrades and his home, but this felt like something he couldn't understand. Taking a deep breath, Jason walked inside, his footsteps echoing in the vast entryway. It was going to be a long journey ahead, and he had no idea what lay in store. But one thing was certain. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. Jason had spent the last 2 weeks on Earth, adjusting to his new reality. Protecting Princess Liraella wasn't as simple as it sounded. Every day seemed to bring new challenges, from keeping her safe in public to trying to navigate the complex politics of her presence on Earth. She was a princess, after all, not just some diplomat or guest. People watched her every move, hoping for a glimpse of power or grace, and Jason was supposed to ensure nothing went wrong. Liraella, for her part, seemed entirely uninterested in the whole situation. She rarely spoke to anyone unless absolutely necessary, and when she did, her voice was distant and cold. Jason had tried to engage with her, but every conversation felt like a wall. It wasn't that she was rude, but there was always a sense of distance, as though she were looking down on everything around her, including him. The mansion where they stayed was a grand, modern structure, hidden away on the outskirts of a busy city. It had all the luxury a person could imagine: marble floors, tall windows, gardens that stretched on for miles. Jason couldn't help but wonder how Liraella felt being here, so far from her home, in a strange and unfamiliar world. Was she bored? Did she miss her empire? Did she ever think about the people she had left behind? Liraella had shown no interest in the outside world. Every day she would stay inside, often retreating to her private rooms. Jason had no choice but to stay close, always watching for potential threats. His mind was constantly alert, scanning the surroundings, even though he hadn't noticed any sign of danger since their arrival. It was as if the entire world was on edge, waiting for something to happen. One afternoon, as he walked through the mansion, Jason found himself standing in front of a large glass door that led out into a small garden. The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly. He thought about going out for a walk, but his responsibilities kept him locked inside, always close to Liraella. As he stared out at the beauty of the garden, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his side. But it was only Liraella, standing there with her arms folded, looking at him with those cold eyes. "You look troubled," she said, her voice low. Jason hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should admit to the frustration building inside him. But there was something in her tone that made him want to speak. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, as if she actually cared for a moment. "It's just this whole situation. I never expected to be doing something like this. I don't think I was prepared." Liraella raised an eyebrow, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're a soldier. What are you not prepared for?" "I'm used to fighting battles," Jason replied. "But this feels different. I'm supposed to keep you safe, but I don't even know what you want." Lyraela stepped closer, her gaze still fixed on him. What I want? She repeated the words, almost as if they were foreign to her. I want nothing, Sergeant Carter. I didn't choose this life. I didn't choose to come here. My people made these decisions for me. My father made these decisions. Jason didn't know what to say to that. He could tell she was frustrated, but it wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed at the situation, at the powerlessness she felt. Jason had always been in control of his actions, always able to make his own choices. But Lyraela, she had been thrust into this life, forced to become a symbol for her people. How could anyone expect her to be happy with that? You don't have to stay here forever, Jason said after a moment. Once the Alliance is stronger, you'll be able to go home. Back to your people. I'm sure they'll understand that this wasn't your choice. Lyraela's expression softened just for a moment. Jason caught it, the slightest change in her posture, like a crack in a wall. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same distant look. She shook her head, though not in disagreement, more like she was lost in thought. I don't know if I'll ever go back, she said quietly. Not after everything that's happened. My people, my family, they see me as a tool, something to be used for their gain. They don't care about me. I'm just a pawn in their game. Jason wanted to say something comforting, but he didn't know how. He wasn't a counselor or a therapist. He was just a soldier. Still, the vulnerability she had shown, even for a brief moment, made him realize just how alone she must have felt. And it made him question everything he thought he knew about her. For the first time since they met, Jason felt a flicker of understanding. He had always seen Lyraela as untouchable, as a symbol of power and grace. But now, seeing her in this light, he realized that she was just as human as anyone else. She had her own fears, her own pain, her own doubts. I don't know what the future holds for either of us, Jason said quietly, but I'll do my best to make sure you're safe. That's all I can promise. Lyraela didn't respond at first. She simply nodded, her gaze moving from Jason to the garden outside. For a long time they stood there in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Lyraela broke the quiet. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to burden you with my problems. Jason shook his head. It's not a burden. I'm here to protect you. That's my job. Lyraela turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. There was something in her gaze, something that Jason couldn't quite place. It was like she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. And for the first time, Jason felt like maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to trust him. I don't need your protection, she said, though her words were softer now. But I will allow you to do your duty, Sergeant. Jason nodded, unsure of what to say next. There was so much more to this situation than he could have imagined. But for the first time since they arrived, he felt a small sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this fragile bond between them could grow into something more than just a mission. He wasn't sure what that would look like, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just guarding a princess. He was beginning to understand the person she truly was. The days that followed were still filled with uncertainty. Jason and Lyraela spent more time together, though the moments of true connection remained few and far between. Lyraela still spent most of her time in her private chambers, her days marked by solitude. Jason couldn't help but notice how often she looked out the windows, as if searching for something she couldn't find here. Maybe she longed for her home, for the world she had left behind. Maybe she just wanted to escape from the weight of her role as a political figure. But there were moments, fleeting moments, when she would speak to him, her voice less guarded, her tone softer. And those moments made Jason believe that, even in the midst of their differences, they could find some common ground. And as the days passed, Jason found himself growing more protective of Lyraela, not just as his duty, but as a person. There was still so much about her that he didn't understand, but he was beginning to see her in a new light, not as a princess, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had been forced into a life she never wanted, and in that, he could relate. They were both caught in situations beyond their control, both struggling to find their place in a world that often seemed too large to understand. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since they met, Jason felt like he was starting to see a path forward, a path where he could protect her, not just with his strength, but with his understanding. And that, in itself, was enough to make him believe that maybe they both had a chance at finding something better. The days seemed to stretch on, one blending into the next. Jason had never imagined life would be like this. He had always been on the front lines, battling alien forces, facing dangerous enemies. But now, his mission had changed. It wasn't just about protecting a princess anymore. It was about understanding her, about finding a way to bridge the gap between two worlds that, despite all their differences, were now inexplicably linked. Princess Liraella continued to keep her distance, but over time, Jason began to see subtle changes in her behavior. She no longer stayed holed up in her chambers for entire days at a time. She ventured out more, occasionally sitting in the garden for hours, gazing at the Earth's blue skies with a faraway look in her eyes. Jason had taken to walking the grounds during his free moments, and on occasion, he would find himself walking beside her. Their conversations, while still few, had become less strained. Liraella had started to open up about her past, about the things that had shaped her into the person she was. It was clear that she was more than just a princess. She was a woman who had borne the weight of responsibility since she was a child. Jason had learned that her role in the Trinara Empire wasn't one she had chosen. It was thrust upon her by birthright. As the only heir to the throne, she was expected to marry for power, to lead the empire in her father's stead. But the idea of living her life for the sake of politics, of having no say in her own future, was a cage she had never escaped. She had been trained for leadership, but it wasn't something she had ever wanted. In many ways, Jason understood that feeling. He had been raised to be a soldier, expected to follow orders without question. He had never been given the luxury of choice either, but he had learned to accept his place in the world, to find meaning in the battles he fought, even if it was never the life he imagined for himself. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jason found himself standing outside near the garden, looking out at the horizon. He heard the soft rustle of footsteps behind him, and turned to see Liraella walking toward him. She was dressed in simple clothes today, nothing regal or formal, just something that allowed her to move freely. "I've been thinking," Liraella said, her voice soft but steady. Jason raised an eyebrow. About Earth, about you, about everything. Jason remained silent, waiting for her to continue. The way she said it made him wonder what had brought on this change. Liraella had always been so composed, so controlled, but there was something different about her now, an openness that hadn't been there before. "I don't know what to make of all this," she continued. "When I first came here, I thought it was just another political mission. I didn't care about the humans. I didn't care about Earth. But now I'm not so sure." Jason turned to face her fully, his arms crossed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Liraella paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I see Earth, I see something different from my world. My people, the Trinara, have everything. Power, wealth, tech, but I've never felt free. The more I learn about this world, the more I see that you have something we don't." Jason blinked, confused. "We? What do you mean?" Liraella's gaze shifted to the horizon, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Freedom?" she said softly. "You have freedom. You make choices. My freedom was brought to him. You're not bound by duty, by obligation. You fight because you want to fight, not because you have to. You're not trapped by tradition or the weight of your family's expectations. You're free." Jason couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Was that true? Was he really free? He had always thought of himself as just a soldier, a man who did what he was trained to do. But Lyraella's words made him pause. He had never questioned the choices he had made, but maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe freedom wasn't something he had truly experienced, not in the way she described it. He shook his head, trying to shake off the thought. I don't know if it's as simple as that, he said. I think we all have responsibilities, things that keep us grounded. But I get what you mean. It's different for you. Lyraella turned her eyes toward him, and for the first time, Jason saw something other than the princess he had been guarding. There was vulnerability in her gaze, a softness that she had always hidden behind her royal composure. I don't know who I am anymore, she confessed. Back home, I was just the princess, the future ruler, the one who had to marry, who had to carry on the bloodline. But here, I'm just lost. I don't know how to be anything other than what I was born to be. Jason's heart softened. He had seen that kind of struggle before, in his fellow soldiers, in his friends. They were often forced to live lives that didn't belong to them, trapped in roles they never asked for. Maybe, Jason said slowly, you don't have to be anyone other than yourself. I know that's easier said than done, but you've got the chance to make your own choices here. You don't have to live by anyone else's rules. Lyraella's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I wish it were that simple. Jason sighed, looking up at the sky. The stars were beginning to appear, flickering against the darkening canvas of space. He knew he couldn't fix everything for her, couldn't take away the pain of being forced into a role she didn't want. But he could be there. And for now, that was enough. The silence stretched between them, comfortable, not awkward, as they both stood there, looking at the stars. Jason wondered what the future held, for both of them. What would happen when the alliance was stronger? Would Lyraella return to her people, or would she choose to stay on Earth? And what would Jason do when his duty was done? Would he go back to the life he knew, or would he change too? Finally, Lyraella spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Thank you, Jason, for everything.
I didn't expect you to be kind. Jason chuckled softly, surprised by her words. Kind? I'm just doing my job.
But I'm glad it's made a difference. It has, she said. More than you know. The quiet grew comfortable once more, and Jason realized that, in this strange situation, they were starting to understand each other. He wasn't just a soldier assigned to guard a princess anymore, and she wasn't just a royal figure to be protected. They were two people, caught in the middle of something bigger than either of them could have ever imagined. And maybe, just maybe, they could find their way through it together. As the stars twinkled above them, Jason felt a flicker of hope, something he hadn't expected to feel on this mission. Maybe they weren't as different as they seemed. Maybe, in the end, they both just wanted to find a place where they could be free, where they could choose their own paths. And for the first time, Jason felt like that future, whatever it might be, was within reach. Not just for him, but for Lyraella as well.